Now it's time to look at the next data types that you can use in Java, and by data types I mean different type of data that can be stored in variables. And we're gonna look specifically at two more data types for storing whole numbers. And we're also gonna look more closely at the int data type. So let's delete this code. Let's also delete the string variable. Now, what is an int? We know that an int is a type of variable which can store whole numbers, but how big the whole numbers can be? So we can put anything here. Actually, you cannot put any number you want. There is a minimum and maximum value which can be stored in an integer data type. Again, integer data type is used for storing whole numbers. So if you put here 22.2, you will have an underline, because now we no longer have a whole number. You have a number with a fractional part. So let's delete that. And now, to get the maximum value which can be stored in an int, we type integer with uppercase R, uppercase I, dot, and we type max value. And this line of code that is here, integer dot max value, we're gonna talk about in the future video what is this. But for now, this is gonna give us the maximum value which can be stored specifically in an int, in an integer data type. So I'll type here int max. And there is also a minimum value which can be stored in an int. So I'll type int min equals, I'll type again integer dot, and I'll type min value and semicolon. Now down here I will add a print and system dot out dot print line, and I will print the minimum value and the maximum value. So I'll type here, but let's say that I type here simply, I put double quotation marks and I type max. What do you think will be the output? So if you run this, we get the text max, because whatever you put inside the double quotation mark is considered as text, as string. So it's not a variable which contains a value. So let's delete this. Let's put again double quotation marks and let's type the maximum value for an int equals, and we're gonna type plus, and we're gonna type our max variable from above. Next I will press Ctrl D and I will type here the minimum value, and here I will change it to min. So I'll put here min. Now if you run this, you get the maximum value for an int is, and we have this big number 2,147,000,000 and so on, and then we have the minimum value is minus 2,147,000,000 and so on. So those are the minimum and maximum values can be stored in an integer. If you try to put a number which is bigger than that, you'll end up with an error. So if I try to put here, let's say let's put parentheses here to make it more clear, and I put max plus 1, look what happens. We get the minimum value output now, because it tried to put this number, which is the maximum number plus 1, it tried to output that in the console, and it couldn't, and because of that it outputted the minimum value. So let me show you more specifically how this error is called. So let's delete this, let's delete also. So let's put here plus 1. So now we have a number bigger than the maximum value because you're adding 1 to it. And now if you hover over here, and every time you see something gray out or if it's colored, that means that IntelliJ IDE wants to tell you something. And here is saying numeric overflow in expression. So he's saying, in other words, hey, you cannot put a number bigger than the maximum value which can be stored in an integer. And if you do that, I will, as it says, I will overflow. And by overflow means that it will try to put that value in an integer, but it's not gonna be able, and it's gonna output the minimum value. So let's delete the 1 from there, and now let's go down here and let's create another type of variable. Let's create now a byte. So we type byte, and let's call this byte max value. I am calling byte max value because if I type here max, we'll have two variables. We have two variables which have the same name, and you can't have this, because if you want to call one of the variables, the compiler or the IntelliJ IDE is not gonna know about which variable you're talking about. So let's call this max byte value, and now we'll get the maximum, the value which can be stored in a byte. So we're gonna type here byte dot max value. Then I will press Control. I'm gonna put semicolon. I will press Control D, and I will change this to min byte value. So min byte value. Let's put min, and let's change this to min byte value. And this is again is gonna return us the maximum value which can be stored in a byte and a minimum value which can be stored in a byte. So if you run this, actually we get nothing because we need to output something in the console. So let's copy those two that we have here. Let's paste it below, and let's change the maximum value for a byte, and here for a byte also. And let's call our variables, and as you can see they are gray out now, because this is if you hover over, it says that variable max byte value is never used. So whenever you see something colored or gray out, that means that IntelliJ is telling you something. So let's call our variable here. So let's type max byte value and min byte value. So only min byte value. Now if you run this, we get the maximum byte value is 127, and the minimum byte value is minus 128. And this is those min and max for byte are considerably smaller than the int. So the int data type is much bigger than the byte. And there is another data type which is bigger than the integer data type, and we're gonna look at that now. So let's look at the next data type which is bigger than an integer, and that is called a long. So let's go down here. I will type long. So this is how we declare it, long. And next I'll give it a name. Let's say let's type max long value equals, and I will type here long dot max value semicolon, and I will type again long min long value equals long dot min value semicolon. Now let's output in the console the minimum and maximum value which can be stored in a long. So I'll type here system dot out dot print line, and I will type here simply long, or let's type long max value equals, and put a space, plus max long value, Control D, and let's change to, here it should be long, not log, long, and let's change this to min. Now if you run this, as you can see, the maximum value which can be stored in a long is much bigger than the integer, and it's, I don't know how to read this number. And this is the maximum number which can be stored in a long, and this is the minimum value which can be stored in a long. And but let me show you something interesting. So look what happens if I go down here. So I'll go down here, where is the code, and I will declare a variable also long called let's call it my number. And let's say that I try to put here a number which is let's put the maximum value which can be stored in an int. Let's put it inside the my long variable. So let's put semicolon. Okay, so everything works fine now. But now if I increase this by 1, look what happens. I get an error. And now you may be wondering, hey, but this number that we have here is much smaller than the number that can be stored in a long, so why you get an error? And this is the important part. Happens because the assume type, which when you type literally a value, when you type a number, is an int. So this is considered to be an integer. This is why you have an error, because if you have a row where it says integer number too large, in order for this literal value, because this is called a literal, and it's a literal because we type this ourselves directly here, and it will treat this as an integer. So no matter what you try to do, it will always be an integer. To be treated as a long and to fit in a long, we need to put L suffix at the end. So I put L, now everything goes fine. But you can also put uppercase L. And sometimes it's good to use uppercase L to not be mistaken with for the lowercase L to not be mistaken with 1. So this is why you should use uppercase L. And now if you run this, actually, as you can see, the error disappeared, and now everything works fine. Alright, so those are the data types for storing whole numbers. In the next video, we're going to look at the other data types called floating point data types, and with those floating data types, we're going to store numbers which have a fractional part. So see you in the next video.